Elisabeth, thank you for taking the time to be on today's Targeted Talks, Leaders in Oncology. For those of you that don't know Elisabeth, she's a medical doctor, trained in oncology, hematology, and more. Has got an amazing profile. So if you missed the first one, I'm Jamie. I'm the host of the podcast. I've done 10 years in oncology clinical development. So mainly recruiting physicians like Elisabeth. What I'd love to do is let you do an introduction, Elisabeth, so all the listeners can hear a bit about your journey and your career. So if we could rewind and take things all the way back to the start to give them a kind of a shortened version of your career, that'd be a great place to start.
Yeah, thank you, Jamie. Really appreciate the efforts and the opportunity for this interview and to give some insights into our jobs. I trained as a physician and decided for hemato-oncology and internal medicine, for which I'm board certified, actually due to the fact that it is an ideal place to do science and clinical care for patients at the same time. However, doing that is rather exhausting, I must say, because you are, during my clinical times, when I was also working in the lab, I found it quite stressful to divide my time properly. You're always torn between what you do first. Do you do clinics or science? And that finally brought me into pharma industry because the first job I've got in a CRO, they were very kind people, a great team, and they tried to convince me to join the industry. And as a researcher and clinician, normally one thinks one is leaving the real job if you join the industry, but they
Going to the dark. You're going to the dark side a little bit.
exactly, and that I was a little bit hesitant about that, but they convinced me, and it was actually at PRA International. It was a lovely, lovely team, and it gave me a great insight into how the industry works from a CRO perspective, but also due to the fact that I did advisory roles for clients, small biotechs or large pharma. It gave me quite a good insight as a starter of what exactly is required. But then I got headhunted by AstraZeneca, which was quite exciting, I must say. But in the first place, I thought, why on earth should I move to England? Because my family and my whole life was at the time in Germany. And they did such a brilliant job. It was such a lovely day, really, to go to Alderley Park and to have this interview. And it wasn't hard to say yes to that job offer as a study physician initially. It's a beautiful place. I'm not sure if anybody has been to Alderley Park, but is absolutely amazing. And it offered me actually what I really wanted to do, clinical science and research at the same time. And the big opportunity in pharma industry actually is, if you are a physician, you always specialize with one or two disease areas maximally. I mean, in Germany, in the university I worked in Germany, oncologists are also hematologists. So I did solid tumors and liquid tumors as well, and bone marrow transplantations, which was very good retrospectively also for my job in AstraZeneca, because I then also could take on some safety roles for the bone marrow safety knowledge groups, which were covering all AstraZeneca drugs, which was really, really interesting to explore the safety profiles of these drugs. And you can learn a lot from safety back to the bench. So it's frequently what people are saying is there need to be a good communication between the results you achieve with different drugs and feeding that back to preclinical in order to redefine and improve our knowledge of the science and the mode of action of drugs. So that was really great. Yeah. So I think that's a short overview of how I ended up in England. I found my home in England. I love this country. I will probably not leave anymore. I visit Germany. It's my country where I was born and where my children and grandchildren still live. But I love the culture and the lifestyle. The English lifestyle is simply exactly the right thing for me, and I'm very happy that I made this move.
Amazing. Thank you for that. I was going to say, moving from Germany and leaving, friends and family, moving to England is a big decision. So whoever you met at AstraZeneca and the day you spent at Audley Park, they've done a grand job of convincing you to make that move. So if that person or people are listening to this, you're very good salespeople. So if you could teach me a tip or two, that'd be great. So you moved to obviously AstraZeneca, and you kind of had that grounding in the CRO. So moving from academia into CRO, a lot of physicians, they go from academia into big pharma, and they might start their career at a Roche or a AZ, Daiichi, whoever it might be. How did you find that grounding in a CRO and being a service provider? How do you think that kind of gave you that clinical development grounding?
I think grounding is exactly the right word. So, what you normally don't do as a practicing clinician, you don't do all this documentation, database, SOP, maybe nowadays, definitely SOPs. So, yeah, absolutely. But all this background stuff of databases, how to analyze the data. Sometimes you do that as a clinician, especially if you are running clinical trials. You have to do that as well. And if you publish those, but not that extensive, not that extensive. And I think what also is very different in pharma industry is that you are exposed to drugs with very different mode of actions, and they can work across the whole range of oncology. And this is normally nothing you do. Normally, you are specialized either in renal cell cancer or in prostate cancer or in breast cancer or in whatever.
Sure.
When you join pharma industry, your view needs to be much broader, which is quite a challenge sometimes because it's very hard to understand with a deep knowledge all these different cancer types,
Yeah.
which from their clinical perspective very different. They are treated differently. The mode of action is different. So it's very, very hard to stay on top of the recent developments in every tumor type. That's a big, big challenge. But it's exciting on the other hand as well. And when you wanted to do research as I wanted to do in the first place, that is even more attractive than focusing as a clinician only on one tumor type, for example.
It kind of seems to be people would take that CRO route, or they go into big pharma as their kind of first role out of being a clinician. So it's interesting to hear your kind of views on that. Did you always want to go into medicine? If I was kind of talking to Elisabeth back when you were a child, was that always your goal, your mission to go into medicine, or did you want to be something else, like a soccer player or a football player or something like that?
No, I wanted to be an interior designer at one point when I was around 10 years old.
Mhm.
But interestingly, the route into medicine and oncology was quite a strange one.
Mm.
And you might find that very naive of me. But I grew up mainly with my dad, who was a very good GP. And he used to take me frequently. I went to him with him to his office to do my homework and things. And he also took me to visit patients with him. And the next morning, I always asked him, "Oh, how is this person doing, and how did that develop?" And I loved being in his office, and I was sitting in a little room where all the syringes were sterilized at the time. At that time, they were all glass and no plastic, so that was quite a procedure to keep them clean. So I loved to see that, and these patients he had, they always recovered. So for me as a child, and I know it sounds ridiculous, but until I was 18 years old, I thought that fortunately in the 20th century, people do not die from diseases anymore.
Mm.
And then my father died from melanoma. And he didn't tell me that he was ill. So the experience that he was dying was made, I understood that in a time frame of 3 weeks. And it was a total shock. My whole worldview crumbled at that moment. And yeah, I don't know. It had passed me by completely that still people die from diseases. It was the complete
Yeah.
illusion I lived in. But that whole world crumbled. And I thought, bloody hell. And my dad was really my family and my rock in a way, because my mother wasn't very well and lived in Austria at the time. And yeah, my world suddenly did not exist anymore when he died. And I thought, I need to understand what this horrible disease is. How could that have happened? And I need to understand that. And that brought me into medicine. Long
Mm.
story short.
No, it's and you know what? First of all, I'm so sorry to hear that. The most successful people I ever talk to, you know, if that's clinical developers or people in different industries, there always seems to be something that's happened to them in their life that's made them that curious or has made them kind of who they are. And, you know, there's undoubtedly that event in your life that's kind of shaped you to be, you know, who you are today. And it actually reminds me very similar to kind of my story and why I got into the industry. I mean, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a PhD. I've never worked in medicine, but when I was a child, my little sister passed away of following a transplant, and I spent a lot of my childhood in hospitals, and I was always kind of curious to what happened, and you know, why did X happen when Y was done, and stuff like that. And so when I kind of grew up and got older, I thought I want to get into the industry. I'm not smart enough to be a doctor, so I'm going to have to try and find a different route. And that's kind of how I landed up in recruitment, but kind of very similar story to yourself from like a curiosity perspective.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. Yeah, it's always sometimes such sad stories drive you forward.
Mm, yeah, completely agree. On a more positive note, Elizabeth, you mentioned interior design was your kind of what you wanted to do when you were a 10-year-old. You've definitely got style. I can tell you that. So
Oh,
you've
thank
still
you.
got that in you, that passion for sure. So at the moment, obviously, you've got the kind of moving topic. You mentioned that obviously Germany is your hometown, but you love England and you love the culture. You've obviously got the European Football Championship going on at the moment. The question is, who are you supporting? Are you supporting Germany or are you supporting England?
Yeah, that is a good question. I normally, and my German fellows will kill me for it. Normally, I support England.
That's the answer I was hoping
Or,
for.
since I live in Scotland, they also would kill me for that. So
Wow.
I'm
Yeah.
supporting Scotland, where now they unfortunately lost and needed to go home. I
Mhm.
think I'm supporting England now. Um, I can't say. Maybe I honestly, with my family, we speak every time either Scotland plays against Germany or England, and we always have a fight who is supporting who now.
Zooming back into your career, you've obviously done CRO, you've done big pharma, and recently you've done the kind of smaller biotech gig as well. And you've also gone on to manage successful teams as well, multicultural, kind of multinational teams across cross-functional groups, clinical development, regulatory toxicology, drug safety. What would you say the secret is in kind of being able to manage global teams remotely, but also cross-functional in your opinion? If there's a listener that's listening to this talk about, and they're managing cross-functional teams, global multinational cross-functional teams, what advice would you give them to, you know, keep that group being successful?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think it's not that easy. I think you need to strike a very fine balance on checking actually what people are doing,
Mhm.
but not to be too intrusive. So simply to have at the same time sort of a laid back, trusting
Mhm.
position that people are doing what they're supposed to do.
Autonomy, would you say, like giving people that
Give people
accountability?
autonomy, yeah.
Mm.
But you need as a if your team should work properly. So the key question is, what do you do and how do you find out if it's all going right? And actually, it's not that difficult to find that out, because at the end of the day, it will surface very quickly if somebody isn't doing their job.
Sure.
And interestingly, so when I joined Nucana here in Edinburgh, that was
Mhm.
actually during COVID. I didn't meet the team at all. I insisted in coming to the office to say at least hello to my boss at the time, and
Mhm.
we were sitting there, only the two of us. So the
Wow.
whole work from home situation, I think, has changed massively. The Nucana leadership team initially were very much old school. They wanted to have people in the office all the time, but COVID torpedized that or torpedoed that. And people got used to the fact that employees are doing their job nevertheless.
Mm.
And interestingly, everybody agreed that when we come to the office, no work is being done. Because there are so many chats to be had, and coffee moments and lunch and whatever we do, that at the end of the day has disappeared and no work has been done. I think employees understood over the time that if you can rely on employees, and I'm coming back to your point on how do you manage employees, that they normally, if they are reliable, they do their job much better, or they work actually much better at home. And Zoom meetings and meetings which you schedule on the computer are more to the point, because you do not Zoom somebody to waffle around
Yeah.
over a coffee for half an hour. You rarely
Mm.
do that. I mean, sometimes for farewell things or whatever, we do that, but normally you don't. So meetings are more to the point, to what you want to discuss. You get
Mm.
on with it. It will be 20 minutes or half an hour or whatever, and then you go back to your documents which you have to work on. So in general, I think if you what is important is that you keep up a good atmosphere in the team, that everybody likes to work for a certain or in a certain team, feels welcomed and heard there, because then they also do a very good job. And
Mm.
then the whole autonomy question is less important, because you then experience that they anyway are doing a good job. I think that fine balance is really important. I mean, I had an employee who was really very difficult to manage, and you could see that easily, because he wasn't even available at Zoom for two-thirds of the day, and then you wonder where on earth is this person. Sometimes really you need to get information rather quickly, so it's really important that you can get hold of people, as you would jump next door and say, "Can what do we have here? Can you help me with that?" or whatever.
Mhm. Yeah, no, brilliant, and I completely agree. I think the first of all, COVID, before COVID, from my perspective, a lot of biotech leaders, executives, they wanted office-based staff, and they kind of missed out on talent, really talented people, because they weren't open to having remote-based staff. So I think COVID's been a positive change from a remote working perspective. I'm
Yeah,
definitely seeing a lot more executives and companies asking for more office-based presence. And it also seems to be that people do miss having that face-to-face interactions
yeah.
sometimes.
It is absolutely important. A mixture, I think, is the best
Yeah.
because you can only develop proper relationships when you see people. There is a certain element which doesn't come across in Zoom
Mm.
about the general atmosphere and also when people talk with each other, that's sometimes really difficult to follow on Zoom if
Yeah.
many people are talking. So this is not possible. So what
Mm.
we do normally is we have regular meetings where we all go to the office, but we have also employees. My boss, for example, is situated in Boston. He never attends in person, and
Mm.
that never created a problem at all. So
Mm. Mhm.
it depends really on how you structure your team meetings, and it needs to be a close relationship with all of the team members if you want to have a successful team.
Yeah.
But you need to leave people autonomy to do their own thing and to feel also respected, I think.
Yeah, I think autonomy is such a great word, especially in today's kind of modern working environment. You mentioned kind of creating a fun environment, but an environment where people almost feel like empowered and fun to a certain extent. Something that I've actually really struggled with my teams in recruitment is creating that environment, but remotely and via a camera. I'm so used to doing it in an office, which I am here today in the office. It's much easier to do. How do you go about creating that environment remotely when you've got yourself in Scotland, you've got your boss in Boston, someone in Germany, and how do you create that fun environment and a genuine environment as well? Because I failed once trying to do quizzes online and virtual coffees and things like that, and they all ended falling flat on their face, annoyingly. But
Really?
yeah,
Oh,
but that's how I felt at the time. Maybe my staff and employees would say they really enjoyed it, but I didn't feel it was as natural. It was a bit more forced. What would you say, in your opinion, to create that environment remotely? What's the kind of secret sauce?
I think the secret sauce actually is in Zoom and Teams,
Hmm.
and to have non-complicated chats during the day about work or about whatever else is going on. So really encourage people to take up the phone or the meeting invite and say, if there is anything on your mind, let it be interpersonal, fact related, business related, science related, whatever. Pick up the phone and speak to people. And actually, I mean, my Nucana experience is extreme because I got recruited during COVID and nobody was ever in the office anyway. So it worked well. However, as I said before, we then met even during COVID, with the appropriate distance, we finally met all together in the office, and that was very helpful to understand better how people are and how they tick and whatever. So this element is absolutely necessary, but we didn't fall apart, and it works actually quite well. We chat all together as if we would be next door.
Mm.
And I can't tell you exactly why that happened this way, because I tried to find a reason why this didn't work out so easily for you. I also find, so for example, if we are forced to have farewell meetings or kind of party things online, that is always a little bit forced and
Yeah.
not natural because
Yeah.
people sit there with their coffees and don't know really what to chat. And what you cannot do on these internet platforms, it's impossible for multiple people to talk. So it can't be a proper party. It
Yeah.
simply
Yeah.
doesn't work because people then lose and they don't understand what's being said.
Mhm.
So that doesn't work. I think it is about relaxed working environment where there is no fear to ask anything. There
Mhm.
is no prejudice, let's say
Yeah.
it this way, because science, as I said at the beginning, is complicated, especially in pharma industry where you have so many disease areas, potentially depending on the target to cover. It is really important that you have a trusting environment between the scientists, between the operational people. There are many things which are going wrong operation-wise between CROs and the industry and CRAs and data entry, for example, and that all needs to be sorted out. And due to the nature of where all these companies sit and where the hospitals are in global studies, you are bound to work with the internet. It's not possible otherwise. And I think you can create a collaborative atmosphere in these meetings. And fortunately, it worked very well for us.
Amazing. That's such a great answer. And, I've failed in some instances when I tried to kind of, like you say, use the word forced meetings to create an environment, and they just fell flat on their face.
Yes,
And that's definitely
yeah.
something that I learned very, very quickly. I also think, to kind of add on, is that you have to have the right people. And I think that in any business, if it be a recruitment business like mine or a biotech or a pharma company, you have to have amazing people, and the war for talent is just so important. And for these meetings and for those virtual atmospheres to be fruitful, I think having the right people in the right roles is really important, and the right characters. And I was speaking to somebody recently, and we were debating around hiring, and especially in biotech, do you, in your opinion, kind of the question is, do you hire for attitude, or do you hire for someone's skill, or sorry, someone's prior experience? As there's sometimes the question I get is, Jamie, we want to hire a medical director. We want them to have biotech experience, first in human experience, hematology experience, and all these things. But sometimes I speak to someone who's just got it. Their attitude is just amazing. And so I get into this debate, and I had this debate with someone: is, do you hire for attitude or do you hire for experience? And you've been a successful leader and you've run teams, biotech and pharma. So what do you think? Attitude versus experience when you're hiring someone for your teams?
Yeah, I think there is no black and white answer. There is no yes or no. I think experience is essential.
Mm-hmm.
There is a big but. I think the ground needs to be there. People need to have, depending on the role, a very good understanding of disease areas. Ideally, honestly, they should have some clinical experience, because that is essential to understand multiple things. It's really hard to explain, but clinical experience teaches you something non-verbal, which you hardly grasp, which is really important in order to understand how patients, what the dangers can be and what the safety could potentially be, what you can do, what you cannot do, what is also from an operational perspective completely impossible. You need to have this kind of basic understanding. As I said, in pharma industry, where you have to deal with multiple tumor types, which nobody is perfect in, you can acquire certain knowledges. But for example, if you never have seen a leukemia patient, I think it's very hard to work suddenly on a leukemia trial. You need at least to have a basic understanding of what the problem is. If then you need to learn what the latest treatment paradigms is, if you have understood the basics, that's fine. You can do that in a way, even if you haven't worked for a few years in this kind of disease area. And coming to attitude, I think that is really essential, because a person with a wrong attitude, and it's really, I think it's for recruiters difficult, and also for people who are in pharma industry who are interviewing for positions, is really not that easy to immediately understand the character of a person, because they all present themselves to their best abilities in a way. But that is really absolutely essential, because as we just said, you can only run a good team, a successful team where everybody is autonomous if everybody plays according to the rules and is not particularly hysterical about things or whatever it is. Certain personalities are really, really, really important to make the whole team work or not work. And I think that's essential.
You mentioned the point about, testing somebody's attitude. It's so hard to do. Even myself, I ask questions to try and figure out what somebody's like. But I think from a recruiter's perspective, sometimes it's the off-interview conversations that I have with people that really determine their attitude, how they respond to emails, how polite they are, how they present themselves away from putting their best self forward in their kind of interview cap on. And so sometimes I advise my clients, this person's been they've been following up, they've been asking questions, they're really inquisitive, they really want this role. And I think that sometimes tells a lot about someone's attitude and who they are as a person, instead of what they're like in an interview, because everyone's great.
True.
Yeah, exactly. But one of the questions, kind of one of my final questions before we conclude, Elisabeth, is big companies versus small companies, and there's challenges in both. What would you say is kind of the biggest advice that you would give someone moving from a big pharmaceutical company, an AstraZeneca, for example, into a smaller company? Because that has its challenges. What advice would you give someone who's contemplating making that move and perhaps jumping out of a rush into a small company?
I think for me, joining AstraZeneca was a brilliant move. In such a big company, you have the possibility to learn so much. You have all the different functions at your doorstep in a way. And I think that makes life sometimes very easy, and there is no anxiety of where to get any information from, because you can simply go next door and there's the database managers, there are the statisticians, there are the DMPK people who do the drug formulations and all that, the scientists, etc. Whatever you want to know, whatever you don't feel familiar with, you have immediately next door. That's not always the case in small biotechs, although when I joined Kymab and then also Nucana, I was amazed, absolutely amazed of what a small group of people can achieve. It is true that they do not have all the functions, but they mostly had all the essential functions like regulatory, and for statistics, for example, we had brilliant consultants. You need to get accustomed that consultants you can't easily always contact because they also have other things to do. So their availability, they are not automatically next door where you can step in and ask any question you want. So that needs to be a little bit more structured. But otherwise, I must say the difference between these two small biotechs I have experience with and AstraZeneca is not as big as I expected the change to be.
Okay.
Another benefit of smaller companies is that you simply have less people. And that makes things sometimes less complicated, because in big pharma, you have project teams of loads of projects. And these project teams sometimes turn into little duchies. They can be very secretive about what's going on. Maybe not with their senior leadership team, but within the groups. I found sometimes a little bit challenging that it wasn't very open within, even not within the company, which I find sometimes sort of hindering a broader understanding of what the challenges of other drug development pathways were. And that doesn't happen in small biotechs because everybody, even if you have different projects, everybody's working on these different projects and everything is very transparent.
I've never really thought about it like that before in terms of the people side of things, because I suppose a smaller group of people, it's easier for them all to be behind the mission and
Yeah,
to work collaboratively. Whereas a big company with thousand people,
yeah,
it's probably
right.
harder.
Yeah, it is. It is. And everybody is trying to find their own niche in this huge, vast pool of people, which is also understandable, but that makes it sometimes more complicated.
Yeah, never thought of it like that. And I think it's certainly an interesting point that you mentioned around the size of the people, sorry, the size of the headcount, size of the team, because that's obviously going to make a big difference. If anyone's looking to move into small biotech, take that advice on board for sure. Well, Elizabeth, I think that's everything from me. Thank you so much for being our second guest. It's been a pleasure, and I think some of the wisdom that you've shared today is and will be invaluable for people who are listening to the podcast. So thank you for being a part of it.
Thank you very much, Jamie. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Excellent stuff. Well, that's all. Thank you very much, everyone who's listened. Tune in to the third episode, which will be announced in due course.